Welcome to our deep dive into Deep Work by Cal Newport. I've got like a stack of notes and highlights from the book. It's all 306 pages, but our goal here isn't to like rehash everything. It's more to pull out those golden nuggets, the stuff that can actually help you work more effectively. And to help me kind of sift through all this, we have an expert with us who can break down all the science and strategies in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, most productivity advice is all about like doing more things.
Yeah.
But deep work flips that whole script. It's about producing better work, and it's all about changing how you approach it.
Yeah. It's not just like another to-do list hack. This book makes a really compelling case that deep work is becoming not just beneficial, but like crucial, especially in our tech-driven world. In fact, there's this story about Nate Silver, the guy who predicted the 2012 U.S. election results, and he was amazingly accurate.
Oh, yeah, Silver story. It's like the perfect illustration of how deep work can really set you apart.
Yeah.
He wasn't just like crunching numbers. He was spending hours and hours just deeply analyzing data and building these complex models, refining his predictions, all in this state of intense focus. And that level of focus, that's what let him get their remarkable results.
So it wasn't just that he was good with data. It was that he was able to just like shut everything else out and really think on this deeper level. Now, the book argues that people like Silver, people who can master their attention, they're going to be the ones who thrive in what Newport calls the intelligent machine age.
Exactly. The book lays out these three groups,
Yeah.
three groups of people who are positioned to win in this new landscape,
Right.
You've got the people who can work with intelligent machines, collaborate effectively. Then you've got the superstars in their fields who are pushing boundaries, and then the people with access to capital. But the common thread between all of them is that they need these deep work skills if they want to excel.
And that makes you wonder about all those open office layouts. The ones we see all over Silicon Valley. Are they really good for this kind of deep thinking? The book contrasts those environments with the habits of people like Silver and even David Heinemeier Hansson, the guy who created Ruby on Rails. And both of those guys seem to favor being alone, especially for the most important work.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox. You've got this emphasis on open communication and collaboration. But then the reality is that deep work, it often requires these periods, uninterrupted periods of focused concentration.
Yeah.
Like Cal Newport himself,
Yeah.
the author. He walks the walk. I mean, he managed to get a PhD, write multiple books, and become a professor at Georgetown, all while keeping a reasonable schedule. That tells you something.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
So how do we even begin to cultivate this deep work superpower? The book talks about the neuroscience of focus, and it brings up this idea of attention residue, which honestly kind of blew my mind.
Oh, yeah. It's a real game changer once you understand how it works. It's like every time you switch between tasks, let's say from writing an email to checking social media, a little bit of your attention gets stuck on that previous task. It's like this mental clutter. That makes it harder to focus on the new thing you're trying to do.
So even if we think we're being productive, by juggling all these things at once, we're actually making it harder for our brains to engage with any one task. It's like constantly switching gears in a car. You never really get up to speed.
Exactly. And the book gives this example of high-tech workers using this messaging app called Hall. They were all about rapid-fire communication and task switching. But they ended up lacking deep focus, and that impacts the quality of their work.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how this all connects to my own work. All those times I've tried to write something important while also checking social media and answering messages. No wonder I felt so scattered.
And that feeling of being scattered, it matters more than you think. Winifred Gallagher, she's a science writer, who explored this link between attention and happiness. And she argues that constantly switching between shallow tasks, it trains your brain to see your whole workday as this series of stressful, unimportant things, even if the individual tasks aren't bad.
So even if we're checking things off our to-do list, if we're not engaging in deep work, we're setting ourselves up for a pretty unfulfilling workday. And maybe even a less fulfilling life overall. That's kind of scary.
It is. But the good news is we're not stuck with these habits. The rest of deep work, it's all about strategies for retraining your brain and reclaiming your ability to focus deeply. That's where it gets exciting.
Well, I don't know about you, listener, but I am ready to dive into those strategies. Stay with us. We're about to get into the practical side of how to actually make deep work happen in your own life. Okay, so we've established deep work is valuable, and honestly, it's becoming essential. But how do we do it? Where do we even begin?
Well, the first step, it might sound kind of counterintuitive, but it's all about learning to embrace boredom.
Embrace boredom. That sounds like the opposite of productivity. I thought it was all about optimizing and squeezing in as much as possible.
Yeah, that's the trap. Most of us fall into it. Our brains are just so used to all the pings and notifications, the constant stream of information. We've lost the ability to just be, to just sit with our thoughts without needing a distraction.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. My phone, it's like an extension of my hand. Waiting in line for 5 minutes. Got to check those emails. Sitting alone at a restaurant. Time for some mindless scrolling.
And that's the habit we need to break. Deep work has this fascinating example of Orthodox Jews and their daily study of the Talmud.
The Talmud.
Yeah, it's this ancient text. It's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And it demands intense concentration.
So they're basically training their brains for deep work through this centuries-old practice.
Yes, and it's not just theoretical. The book mentions this guy named Adam Marlin, and he found that studying the Talmud, it actually boosted his focus and creativity. In his business life, it was like a mental workout that helped him in other areas. And there's research to back this up. Clifford Nass, he studied the impact of multitasking, and he found that chronic multitaskers, they struggle to concentrate. Even when they try to focus, their brains are so used to jumping between all these stimuli, they can't stay on track.
Okay, so we need to wean ourselves off those distractions. But that's easier said than done, especially with social media. It feels like everyone's constantly connected, sharing their lives.
Right. That's where a digital detox can be so powerful. Newport suggests a 30-day social media experiment. Just step away from the platforms entirely and see what happens.
It's kind of like that minimalist challenge, where you pack up all your belongings, and you only unpack what you actually need and use. This social media detox. It could help us see those platforms with fresh eyes. Do we actually miss them? Or are we just afraid of missing out?
Exactly. It helps you break free from that fear of missing out, that FOMO, and you get a more objective perspective on those platforms and what role they play in your life.
Okay, so we're embracing boredom, ditching the distractions. What's the next step in building this deep work muscle?
Oh, this one. It might sound a bit rigid, but it's about taking control of your time by scheduling every minute of your day.
Every minute. That sounds intense. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast, let alone plan out every minute of my day.
It's not about being a robot. It's about being intentional. Cal Newport himself, he uses this strategy, and he says it's about consciously deciding how you spend your time. So you're not just letting it get frittered away on things that don't matter.
Right. It makes me think about how much time we spend on things like watching TV or just scrolling through social media. We live in this fog of busyness. But if we actually track our time, we might realize we have more control than we thought.
Exactly. And by planning our days in advance, we can make time for deep work.
So we're scheduling deep work. But the book also talks about identifying and eliminating what Newport calls shallow work. Can you explain the difference?
Sure. Shallow work is basically all those tasks that can be done by someone with minimal training, like answering emails, attending pointless meetings, mindlessly filling out forms, stuff that doesn't need your unique expertise.
He even has this litmus test, he says. How long would it take to train a recent college grad to do this task? If it's a matter of weeks, it's probably shallow work. If it takes months or years of experience, then you're tapping into something deeper.
That's a great way to look at it.
So it's not about working less. It's about making sure we're working on the right things, the things that actually get us closer to our goals. But with all this talk about focus and productivity, is there even room for downtime? In the deep work philosophy, don't we risk burning out?
That's where a lot of productivity advice gets it wrong. Downtime. It's not the enemy of deep work. It's essential for it. The book makes a strong case for deliberate rest, giving your brain a chance to recharge and process information.
That makes sense. It's like when you're struggling with a problem and you step away for a bit, and then suddenly the solution pops into your head while you're taking a shower or going for a walk.
Exactly. The book calls those shower insights. There's actually research on this. Amp Dijksterhuis, he studied unconscious thought processes, and he found that our brains, they can solve complex problems when we're not actively focusing on them. It's like giving your subconscious mind space to work its magic.
So we're not just talking about vegging out in front of the TV. It's about actively engaging and activities that help us recharge, like walking in nature, spending time with loved ones, reading a good book.
Yes, those are all things that can make us more productive.
And the book even highlights research showing that spending time in nature can improve concentration and cognitive performance. It's like hitting the reset button on your brain. Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've talked about embracing boredom, scheduling our time, eliminating shallow work, and the importance of downtime. But there's one more concept from the book that I find really interesting, the eudaimonia machine. It's like this architectural thought experiment that takes all these principles and puts them into a physical space.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept. David Dewayne, he's an architect professor. He designed this building specifically to facilitate deep work.
It's not a real building, right? It's more like a blueprint for how we could design our workspaces or even our lives to help us do deep work. Can you walk us through this eudaimonia machine? What does it look like?
So imagine this. You enter the building through the gallery. It's a space filled with artwork and objects to get your creative juices flowing. Then you move into the salon, where you can have conversations and brainstorm. And then there's the library, a sanctuary for research and reading. And finally, you reach the heart of the machine, the deep work chambers. They're soundproof, distraction-free, designed for intense focus sessions.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'm picturing myself in one of those chambers, totally absorbed in my work, no distractions.
The eudaimonia machine might be a thought experiment, but it makes you think, how can we design our own environments, both physical and mental, to support deep work?
Yeah. Even if we don't have a fancy eudaimonia machine, we can still use those principles, creating a dedicated workspace, minimizing distractions, setting boundaries. These are all things we can do to make deep work a bigger part of our lives. That eudaimonia machine, it's really making me rethink my workspace. But I think what's really hitting home for me is that deep work, it's not just about a productivity hack. It's about changing how we approach work, maybe even life in general.
Yeah, it's about taking back your attention, your focus, and your ability to do work that matters. We've been talking about all these big ideas. But for the listener at home, who wants to put this into practice? Where would you suggest they start?
Well, one of the biggest things for me has been realizing how much time I spend on shallow work. It's like that saying, what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah.
So maybe start by tracking your time for a day or two and see where the hours are going. You might be surprised at how much time is spent on things that could be delegated or automated or even just eliminated.
That's a great place to start. Once you see all those shallow tasks, it's easier to make changes. And remember, it's not about being a productivity machine. It's about making time for the work that matters, the work that uses your skills.
Yeah. And for me, embracing boredom has been huge. It's so counterintuitive, especially these days. But learning to resist those distractions, even for a little while, it can make a big difference.
It is. It's like building that mental muscle. The more we practice resisting, the better we get at concentrating.
Right. And deep work doesn't mean we have to become hermits or workaholics. The book talks about how important downtime is for recharging.
Yeah.
Deliberate rest. It's not a luxury. It's essential.
It's like fuel for deep work.
Exactly. Taking breaks, spending time in nature, doing things you enjoy. Those are all investments in your ability to do your best work.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I hope it's been helpful. For you, the listener, we've talked about so much, from the neuroscience of focus to practical strategies for deep work.
Yeah, we've covered embracing boredom, scheduling your time, getting rid of shallow work, and the importance of downtime. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one thought.
Okay.
How much more could you achieve? How much more could you create? How much more could you contribute if you could consistently tap into the power of deep work?
That's a great question. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into deep work. Thanks for listening.